Is it possible to learn and practice multiple languages at the same time? And most importantly, should you even do it? Hello number ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy, the channel where we explore how to learn languages in the most fun and effective way possible. Now, people have been asking me this question for quite a while, and that is because they know that I have reached fluency in several languages. So, did I learn them all one at a time, or did I ever mix and try to learn multiple at the same time? The answer to that first question is absolutely. I did practice multiple languages at the same time. In fact, that's basically what I've done throughout my entire life. I want to say the only time where I literally focused on one language only was with my second language, namely English, when I was in the UK. I was living in England. I was moving around a lot, spent some time in Manchester, Wales, London. But at the end of the day, at that time, for about 2 years, I entirely focused on English. But then, as I moved on to other languages, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, French, Greek, I just tried to pick them up all simultaneously. Can it be done? Absolutely. Should you do it? That kind of depends on your personal situation. I'll address that towards the end of the video, so make sure to watch until the end. But right now, I don't want to waste your time. Let's jump right into it. How do you practice multiple languages at the same time? In my experience, what I did is that I never really studied two languages at the same time that I was starting from scratch. So when I started picking up Mandarin, I already had a couple of years in Japanese. When I started picking Japanese, I was already fluent in English. When I started picking up French, my English was fluent and my Japanese was alright. Usually, when you're starting from scratch, you want to dedicate and focus time on that language. I want to say like 80% of your study needs to go to that, and you can leave at 20% to sort of brush up your other languages that you're working on. Once you reach a level that is, I want to say, upper beginner, lower intermediate, that's when I want to say you can absolutely add another language to learn at the same time. So let me show you practically how I do it with Japanese, Mandarin, French, and I'm gonna throw Italian in there, even though, I mean, it's my first language, just for good measure, just to show you that it can be done with multiple languages. Tactic number one. Your first goal is to improve your ability to pronounce, create sentences, use verbs, use adjectives, and learn nouns. These 5 things need to be practiced for each language you use. At the start, I would suggest you to just do it with 2 languages if that's something you want to do. Of course, if you just want to focus on one, be my guest. But if you do want to try and focus and learn and improve in 2 languages simultaneously, stick with 2 for now, if it's your first experience. What I do is that I take these 5 factors I've just mentioned and include them in my routine. So, wake up in the morning, the first thing I say, open my eyes, I want to say, buongiorno, ohayou gozaimasu, 早上好, bonjour. It took me 3 whole seconds, and I've just practiced all of these greetings in each single one of these languages. Make that a routine, do it every day, give yourself a few days, you'll master these. Then I see my wife, and I want to say, ciao, come stai? Konnichiwa, ni hao, ça va? Notice that in both Mandarin and Japanese, I'm not necessarily asking how are you, I'm not saying o genki desu ka, and I'm not saying ni hao ma. That is because they usually don't, so you also want to make it realistic within those languages. You don't necessarily need to say the exact same thing literally, just make it natural. Then what do you do in the morning? Go to the restaurant, perhaps have a shower, say all of that. Okay, vado in bagno. Yoshi, toire ni ikimasu. 我去洗手间. Now, since my Japanese is better than my Mandarin, what I want to do is that with my Japanese, I want to try alternative way to say it, just for practice. トイレに行かなければならないんだ。トイレに行かなければなりません。トイレに行って朝ごはんを食べます. Switch it up since I have a bigger array of words and sentences I can make. In Mandarin, since my level is lower, I also want to practice other sentences that could be useful and maybe I still haven't mastered. So I could ask someone, excuse me, where is the bathroom? 请问洗手间在哪儿? And switch those up during the week. Repetition is key. While I'm in the bathroom, there are so many chances and opportunities to practice. I could say, adesso mi lavo I denti. 今は歯を磨きます。我现在刷牙. Okay, I think I rest my case. I'm not gonna walk you through the entirety of my routine. In fact, I might make a dedicated video. My language learning routine. Look out for that one. But then again, this is pretty much the idea. I see an apple as I open my fridge that day, then I can say, okay, apple in Italian is mela, in Japanese is ringo, and in Chinese is 苹果, etc. So the idea behind my method for learning languages at the same time is to make sure you don't improve in one and forget things in the other. So whenever I try to come up with sentences, I try to see, but do I know this sentence in Japanese too? Like, for instance, if I'm watching a video and they're teaching me how to say a sentence in Chinese, for example, I don't know, something simple, like tomorrow I'm going to Beijing, so I could say 明天我想去北京. Then I think, but would I be able to say tomorrow I am going to Tokyo? And then I say that. 明日は東京に行きます. These, of course, are very simple, and you will have to increase the level of difficulty and complexity of these sentences. And this also tends to work for people who have at least an intermediate level, because if you are very basic, then you need to double check that you're not saying things wrong. But if you reach the point where you kind of know how to double check, you've got people you can double check with, or you can just learn sentences from full-on teachers and classmates, then you can substitute. So for instance, this very sentence, tomorrow I'm going to Beijing, I can also say tomorrow I'm going to school, tomorrow I'm going to the supermarket. And I'm like, okay, supermarket in Italian it's supermercato, in Japanese is super, and then in Chinese is 超市. And then I can practice them, and if I don't remember one of them, then great. You want to make sure they're all sort of not the exact same level, but it's an opportunity to be like, yeah, I could say that in Japanese, but can I say it in Mandarin? Now, the last point I'd like to touch upon is how not to mix them up. And the first way to not mix them up, of course, it's a matter of practice. That's why I try to switch between them all the time, because if you just study a lot of Chinese and then study a lot of Japanese, but they are separate, what could happen is that maybe that thing you've learned in Japanese comes up when you're trying to speak Mandarin, and you don't want that. So to avoid that, in my opinion, what has worked for me is to always try to make sure that I practice the very technique of switching, the very skill of switching, just like I did now with these examples with you. Okay, I can make that sentence in Japanese, let's make it immediately in Mandarin after that, and let's make it immediately in French, just to make sure that my brain is used to switching. So it's a skill. If it has happened to you, if you were learning Spanish, then you started learning Italian, and you start mixing them up, then the problem is that you don't practice enough language switching. Last but not least, one last point, it's easier to choose languages that are not related when you are learning multiple languages at the same time, in the sense that learning Italian and Spanish can be a problem for an Anglophone, because you will mix them up, because they sound similar. Conversely, if you chose to learn Korean and Italian, or Korean and Spanish, it's probably not going to happen that you'll mix them up as much. With that being said, as I always say on this video, make sure still that you choose the languages you like. So don't let this suggestion prevent you from deciding to learn Italian and Portuguese at the same time if that's really what you wanted. Just know that if that's what you're going to do, because it's going to be so much easier for you to mix them up and it's much more likely, then it's a good idea to focus even more strongly into this language switching practice. And why not? Perhaps follow a full-on tutorial on how to practice language switching on this channel. Now, when it comes to this idea of languages that could overlap, language similarity, what languages could be considered to be the ones that are too close to learn them at the same time, this is a little bit of a complex topic, also because there aren't just full-on 100% objective answers to this, simply because there is also somewhat of a perspective or situational element to it. For example, for me as an Italian, if I decided to start learning Spanish and French, am I going to mix them up? Answer is, it's a lot less likely that I will mix them up than it would be for an Anglophone. And the reason is because they are already quite similar to Italian, but Italian is my first language. And so, for example, I will never mix Italian and Spanish unless I spend such a long time in a Spanish-speaking country that expression in Spanish just come to me faster than expressions in my own native language, which can happen. But usually it only happens when you completely abandon your first language and you just speak your second language because you moved. And usually it doesn't mean that you forget your first language, because you literally cannot forget your first language unless you move when you're extremely young. It's just that it can happen that if you literally just never speak to an Italian for 10 years in a row, and then it's not like that you're going to forget Italian, it's just that if you used during those 10 years a language that is kind of similar to Italian, whether it be Portuguese, Spanish or French, then it could happen that as you go back to Italy or as you start speaking Italian, your sentence order might be strange, your choice of words might be a little odd, and that is because, of course, the second language that you're learning, that you have been speaking for so long, is literally influencing the way your brain is building structures. But with that being said, these are extreme cases, and even though it does happen, it doesn't happen that often to the point that it could be a limiting factor in your learning progress. journey. But of course, if you are an Anglophone speaker and then you choose to pick up Romance languages, I want to say with the exception of Romanian, which is still a Romance language, but it's not as similar sounding as, say, Italian, Portuguese, or Spanish are, then yes, if you pick 2 Romance languages, I'm not saying don't do it, but you might need to really focus on this language switching techniques in order for you to not mix them up. And when it comes to Asian languages, I'd say I wouldn't worry about it too much, because even though, again, Mandarin, Japanese, and Korean are all geographically speaking close, they are not really close when it comes to the way they speak, particularly when it comes to Mandarin compared to any of the other 2, Korean or Japanese. Korean and Japanese do have some similarities, but then again, I don't think it's easy to mix them up. And then again, as I say, whatever language you choose, the closer they are, the more you need to practice language switching. The less related they are, the less you need to worry about that. Thank you so much for joining Metatron's Academy, and if you have any questions, as always, feel free to leave them in the comments below.